Let's bring in my panel. Senior reporter at Sky News out of Sydney, Caroline Marcus, and National Affairs Editor at The Telegraph, Sky News host James Morrow. I made the point there about Colin Boyce. There is no spill motion until he can get himself a seconder. He's got one vote in the room. That's probably being generous. That's his own. So I don't think there's necessarily any imminent threat to David Littleproud. However, as we know so often, James, once these things are open, if it's on, anything can happen. And of course, you've got the Nationals now with a little bit of trouble, and you've got plenty of turmoil on the side of the Libs. And for all the talk about the first female leader, Susan Lee, it doesn't look like that alone will save her.
No, I don't think it will save her. And I mean, it's for a number of reasons, not the least of which being the one you just spoke about before, this idea that Liberal voters are going to vote for a female, qua female on the basis of her gender. You know, I don't buy that any more than I buy that whole spin from the left that what the Liberal Party needs to do is soft shoe immigration and, you know, go all in for a big Australia and not talk about the things people want to talk about. If anything, Thomas Paul told us there is that there are a huge number of conversations that people want to be having, and they're not having them. They're not being allowed to have them by either of those two parties, and that's why there's that bleed to one nation. So what does that mean for the Liberals? Well, and the Nats, I think anything can happen now. I used to think until Colin Boyce's motion or attempt to raise a motion, I guess, you know, who's Colin Boyce? That was my first reaction. But then it also said things are so febrile in both of those party rooms right now that any thought that they're going to wait past the next sitting week, which is, you know, next week starting on Tuesday, I don't think that's going to happen. And I think there's a bit of news today out of inflation and those devastating economic numbers, which are going to mean interest rate pain in all of those outer suburban seats Tom was just talking about. That's another thing. The more they are not talking about this and talking about themselves, the more votes they're going to lose. It is existential at this point, Peta, for the Libs to come up with a solution, get a leader, and start fighting this government that is presiding over this economic disaster, as well as the disasters with the response to Bondi and migration and so many other issues we could talk about.
One of the things, James, thank you. One of the things with immigration is, you know, I was watching an analyst, a political analyst, just the other day saying, you know, the problem with the numbers here for the coalition is that Pauline Hanson's leading the charge of immigration, and every time you talk about immigration, she will do well, the coalition will do badly. And I violently disagree with that, Caroline. The coalition can run a good line on immigration, but they've got to get out there and actually run it. They've got to have something to say. And the reason Hanson's doing well is there is a vacuum on immigration. Both major parties, particularly in government, but both major parties, even when they're in opposition, they're not entering the field on this issue. The coalition has left it wide open for Hanson. Susan Lee last year, you know, Andrew Hastie went out there and said, we've got to have a policy to bring it down. She promptly sacked him, sent him to the backbench, said she'd have something by Christmas, dodged that one as well, has come back in the new year, and lo and behold is scratching into head to see, you know, why are my numbers so bad? Why does everyone want to punt me, and why does no one want to back me? This is precisely why you leave a vacuum and someone is going to fill it.
Everyone knows exactly where Pauline Hanson stands on the immigration issues, and they know that she is very tough on immigration. On the other hand, we have a coalition that has been reluctant to put a number on how it would cap immigration to this country. And then we had the Bondi terror attacks, which has opened up a whole new conversation about the dangers of immigration. Of course, this is front of mind for people, especially when they're considering national security issues on what has been the worst terror attack against Jews and the worst terror attack on Australians ever. The worst terror attack on Jews, I was going to say, since the October 7 attack anywhere in the world. But our worst terror attack here. So, of course, people are thinking about it. The coalition has failed to address the issue properly by coming out strongly and giving a number and attacking it. And therefore, people go to Pauline Hanson. It's only natural.
Of course they do. Of course they do. And, James, what about that story today? An exclusive look by The Australian and a letter from the Attorney General Michelle Rowland that she's written to the Australian National Imams Council President, Shadi Alsuleiman, to say that the new hate speech laws won't, quote, prevent legitimate non-violent criticism of the actions of a foreign country or of particular political ideologies. Now, you don't need to read between those lines too hard to see she's referring there to Israel. So the haters of Israel, the haters of Jews, even with these new hate laws, will be able to disguise their anti-Semitism as, quote, opposition to Israel. They'll argue that it's just anti-Zionism, and anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism. And, you know, I back in Scott Morrison's speech in Israel overnight where he says there must be reformation of the Islamic faith in Australia if we are to prevail as a country with the values we once had.
Well, I mean, if Michelle Rowland was nudging any harder with that, I'd wind up with a bruised rib, Peta. I mean, that is such a ridiculous statement that she's made there, because it is giving everybody a guide to say, here's what you say, here's what you don't say, but you can keep saying what you want to say as long as you say it this way. It's just like the criminal penalties that were going to be in the first iteration of those hate speech laws that Labor tried to get up because, of course, Liberals demanded they go back to Canberra and then didn't have anything to offer once they got there. Really well done. But in those laws there again. But if you quote the scripture, you're okay. You know, again, this is this sort of nudge in this week. I had some questions about what Scott Morrison had to say, but I do agree that there needs to be that sort of reformation in Islam. But I think it can't just be in Australia. It has to be a global reformation, you know, throughout that faith.
Well, it's interesting, you know, and Caroline, you know this very well. In a number of Muslim countries in the Middle East, they are very hardline against radical Islam, and Western countries are absolutely weak on this and reap what you sow. I mean, that was the point, I guess, Scott Morrison was trying to put on the table there in Israel. But already we've got the Imams, we've got Sheikh Shadi Alsuleiman. He has hit back this afternoon saying we've got to stop in Australia using terms like radical Islam, going as far as to say that Islam and terrorism shouldn't be linked at all. Does he think we're stupid, Caroline? I mean, Allah Akbar, and off goes the bomb. Does he think we're stupid?
How can we not refer to what happened at Bondi and mention radical Islam? The terrorists were allegedly, it is going still through the court, the surviving terrorist was allegedly motivated by Islamic State, and police allegedly found an Islamic State flag in his car. It is literally in the name of the terrorist organization. It is impossible to discuss these issues frankly without talking about radical Islam. And, you know, Scott Morrison is right. The fact that it took this attack in which 15 innocent people lost their lives on an Australian landmark, Bondi Beach, for Australia to finally ban Hizb ut-Tahrir, an extremist organisation that is banned in several countries around the world for many years, including Islamic majority countries around the world, says everything you need to know about how we have appeased radical Islam for too long in this country.